Hello, time for another vlog. Today it's coronavirus and Brexit, because yesterday officially the UK left the European Union, so I'll be talking about that in a while. But first I want to talk about the coronavirus, because it's in the news and it's getting everywhere, and it's looking like it's getting out of control. Despite China's heroic efforts to quarantine entire cities, this thing spreads like wildfire. And I guess the Australians know what wildfire spreads like. So what can we say about it? And one thing I want to mention is that I think the calculations of the mortality rate are wrong. We know they're not very accurate anyway because it's too early, but the way the calculation is being reported as having been done is wrong. Misconceived. So I'll get onto that in a moment. Just a bit about the virus itself in case you've been living under a rock somewhere. It's, as of yesterday, had infected about 10,000 or so people, maybe a few more, perhaps 11 to 12,000. But it's growing exponentially. I mean, literally, it was something like 6,000 the day before that, and 4,000 the day before that. It's just ballooning, right? Despite quarantine efforts. Obviously, a lot of countries are cutting flights to China. Even companies in the UK are, in some cases, stopping flights between different European countries, just in case. I mean, it's sensible, I suppose, but we don't know how long this is going to go on for. But in most cases, video conferencing can do the trick for businesses. They don't need to flipping well fly everywhere, okay? The problem with this virus is it's super infectious, like a cold. It seems to be airborne, and it seems to infect something like 2 out of 10 people that you have contact with, even casual contact with. So it just spreads really easily. And because it's recently jumped from snakes or bats or whatever to humans, there is little to no immunity in the human population. So you catch it really easily, basically, because of that too. When it lands on you, you don't have any built-in resistance, or very little. And so there we are. There's some talk about whether China has been handling it well. They're taking it seriously now, it appears. But at the beginning, when doctors first started blowing the whistle on blogs and stuff, saying that they were being ignored, the Chinese kind of arrested them and sent them to re-education and stuff like that. And it was really only after about a month that Wuhan got locked down and it entered the news. And in that time, what has it been doing? Spreading. In fact, I don't know how accurate the source is, but I read one source that said that prior to the quarantine of Wuhan, 5 million people had left the city. This is a city the size of London, so that's like at least a third, maybe a half of the population. So somebody knew about it, even if it wasn't reaching the news out here. Hopefully, well, maybe they've taken it with them. Obviously, it's spreading anyway, and it's spreading like crazy. And the real question is, how dangerous is it? What is the mortality rate, the kill rate? Now, the mainstream media are reporting some scientific papers that are saying it's about 2.2%. But when you look at the numbers they're using, I think they're doing the calculation wrongly. If you take the current figure, for example, 10,000 infected, 200 dead, roughly, that's a 2% mortality rate, right? And you would think on the face of it, right, what's wrong with that? One scientific paper I read took the rate from a week ago when it was 840 odd infected, or known to be infected, and again about 2% had died from it. About 16 people, something like that, I think. But that's wrong-headed. You can't compare today's infection rate with the death rates of people who were infected a week before. You have to compare the death rates of people who were infected a week before with how many were infected in total a week before. When you catch an illness, you want to know then what are your chances of dying. It doesn't affect you how many other people are going to be infected, and it doesn't affect you. Well, it does, I suppose, if they all die, but it doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect the rate how many people get infected in your future. The rate should be how many are infected at the time you get infected yourself, and how many of those die. And on those figures, the rate is much higher, as much as 20%. I would say that interpretation is wrong also, though. There are so many complicating factors. But nevertheless, and I've seen it in at least one scientific paper doing the calculation wrongly, comparing the current infected with the deaths of people who were infected a week before. That will not give you a true figure. Also, because the virus infection rate is exponentially growing, when you do the calculation that way, it artificially depresses the figure, because obviously more and more and more people are being infected, and these past infected people are dying afterwards. You've got to do it at the same time, a snapshot. So the exponential growth of the infections is resulting in depressed figures for the death rate, because people are not thinking about the maths, and this includes medical experts or people you'd expect to know what they're doing. For comparison, the Sars virus, though, first of all, it took about 8 months to infect as many people as this virus has done in 1 month. So this virus is spreading like crazy. The death rate of Sars was about 14% overall, or 12.8, depends on who you look at, but something like that. Let's say 12 to 14%. Pretty high, but it was a slow-moving virus. This one is fast. For comparison, flu has a kill rate of about 0.1%, but much higher in vulnerable groups, as much as 40% for the unwell and weak or immune suppressed geriatrics, for example. But overall it's about 0.1%. It doesn't kill many, but this virus is definitely higher than that. There's another complicating factor in that there may be many more people infected than are known about. A lot of people might have the virus. First of all, it gives no symptoms for 5 to 7 days anyway, so you've no idea you've got it for at least a week, or maybe up to a week. And it may not be that severe in a lot of people, so they just think they've got a cold and never report it. They just stay home, get ill, get better. They may think it's a flu and it's quite bad, but they still might not report it. So the number of infected people is probably higher than the known number, and it may be easily double. That therefore reduces the death rate calculation figure. Another complicating factor is secondary infections. This coronavirus also appears to be immunosuppressive. That is, it weakens your immune system, I suppose, to help itself spread. But that means you can get a secondary pneumonia or something and die from that. Should that be included in the kill rate? I suppose it should, because you wouldn't have got it otherwise. But we won't know about that for a little bit longer. Another complication may be mutations of the virus, because viruses mutate. So there's one strain at the moment. How quickly and how often does it mutate? Maybe it will get worse, maybe it will get better overall. If it's too severe, a virus undermines its own survival because it kills too many hosts it can't spread. If it's weak, it's actually better for the virus. It doesn't need to give you symptoms, it just needs to multiply, reproduce and spread. The ideal virus would produce no symptoms or nothing serious. This one at the moment is quite serious. It's common with a new virus, so we can expect it to get milder, but maybe not this generation, this year, let's say. We don't know how often it mutates. Ebola, for comparison, was very severe and spread like wildfire again. But despite all the efforts, it was in a war zone, and the people didn't trust the doctors, and even went around killing doctors because they were scared that the doctors were giving them the virus with the vaccines and things of this sort, conspiracy theories, which were, I think, wrong. But in the end, Ebola formed a mutation which was milder. It's still out there. There's still the severe version and there's still the mild version, but the mild version is inoculating people naturally against the severe version. So Ebola is kind of coming under control by natural forces, luckily. There's no guarantee that this virus will do the same. Most viruses do mutate to be milder because it helps them spread. Because if they're too strong, they kill their hosts, they can't spread anymore. They might spread to people who are handling the dead bodies, but it's still not as good as having a host who is healthy and wandering around and coughing and spluttering all over other people, right? That's the ideal. The only way we will know the rate, ultimately, well, there's two ways. One is if the number of infected people stabilises over time, so many people are getting infected every day, and then so many people are dying every day. If it stays roughly constant, then we know we've got the death rate. That's it. The number infected per day over the number dying per day. When it's been stable for a couple of weeks, that's probably very close to the true figure. The other sort is from a cohort study, the other way of telling, which is where you have a group of people who are infected, and you track them all the way through the whole life cycle of the virus until those people have died or people have recovered. What we know is of the first 41 people who are known to have been infected, 12%, that's 5 people, died. So that gives us a vague idea of the kill rate. It'll probably be lower than that because, as I say, some people will be infected who will never know they've had the virus and will recover without ever reporting it. What that figure is, we don't know. Nevertheless, the way the calculation is being reported at the moment, those calculations are wrong. They're completely bogus, actually. You need to know the number infected at the time you got infected. So when symptoms appear, track back to the figure 5 or 6 or 7 days ago and look at the number known infected then, and that will give you a rough idea. Maybe double the number infected from the known infected because of unknown infected. It's very rough, and it's way too early to have anything like an accurate figure. Nevertheless, what we do know is we don't want to catch it. Or if we do, we don't want to be vulnerable. It might be worth stacking up on some vitamins or something, I suppose. I was thinking, what should I do? I live alone, so I don't have someone to look after me if I'm ill. I'll need some easily accessible water. Well, that should be alright. I've got taps, but I can have some bottled water, I suppose, in case society collapses, which it isn't. I don't think it's going to go because of this. Tinned food, useful. Things like soup, easy stuff which is easy, because you're going to be ill, right? Fruit. Trouble is with fruit, fresh fruit goes off in like a couple of days. It's hopeless, right? You buy stuff from the supermarket and it's rotting, in 2 to 3 days. It's inedible. But you can get bags of frozen fruit, intended, in theory, it's suitable for making smoothies from and stuff like that. You can get frozen berries and stuff like that. So, a few bags of frozen fruit will give you a nice vitamin supply, or some vitamin tablets if you like. But fruit is better, because it also gives you some energy. And if you're unwell and unable to eat, you need some energy. Or you'll start shivering and stuff like that, because your temperature will probably go down too low. Then the virus will make it shoot up, and you'll be unstable. And so, also, there are thousands of chemicals and substances in fruit which make it better for you, and it's easier for you to absorb the vitamins too, with all these other substances. And it's also better for you to be able to absorb the sugar properly without it doing you too much harm, or feeding the virus too much, because there are fibres and stuff in the fruit which allow your body to digest it safely. So yeah, I think some tinned soup, some frozen fruit, maybe some other odds and ends, I don't know, some bread and butter, something to spread on that if you like. Things which are easy and don't require you to be hanging around in the kitchen for half an hour cooking stuff or chopping vegetables and so on. Things which, if you're unable to get out of bed, you can have a bowl of it beside your bed. Just pick at it. The DNA sequence of the coronavirus has already been sorted. It has been sequenced, and laboratories around the world, many of them, are working on differing approaches to producing a potential vaccine. It's likely that if there is a successful approach, it will be ready for human trials in the summer and will be mass produced by the autumn, ready to be doled out by the health services or the shops or whatever, the pharmacists. So we kind of, although this thing is spreading like wildfire, we kind of have to hope that it hangs on here in the West and doesn't give us our epidemic before the autumn, because that is really when our vaccines will be ready in bulk, if they're possible at all, or if we're able to make one or more. We shall see. For now, I suggest you don't fly to China. Okay. Right. I'm a little concerned about them bringing people out of quarantine and back to Britain and back to America and so on. Australia has the right idea. Stick them on Christmas Island and make them stay there for a couple of weeks. Yeah. Keep them in quarantine. And the aircrew, I think. Britain is putting them in quarantine too. Not on another island, just on this island. A bit of a shame for an airborne place, but hopefully the building they're in is airtight, but I wouldn't bet on it. Everything is done in an amateur way here. Anyway, we'll see. Brexit. Yesterday at 11 PM, Britain left the European Union. Hooray! I feel a bit sad, even though I wanted to go. it is kind of leaving friends of sorts behind. I mean, obviously they're still there, and we're still here, and we'll still be talking and trading up to a point. But it's a new era. It doesn't mean much in the very short term, because we're going to be abiding by the EU's rules and regulations for another 11 months or up to. And I presume that they will negotiate on different sectors separately. The EU is notoriously hard to negotiate with, but they need to deal with Britain as much as we need to deal with them. So we can apply pressure to them, and we shall see. I think we should have sector by sector trade agreements made so that it can be sorted out as much as possible anyway. But what can we expect? I mean, what does it mean for you and me? It means probably exports are going to go down and imports are going to go up. Certainly next year, because after the trade agreement there will probably be tariffs on lots and lots of goods, and there will be bureaucracy, and there will be non-tariff barriers like shortage of people to check the goods on the order and stuff like that. And this will affect small companies in particular. Big companies will use their money to get through it all, right? They will hire experts and then see that it happens, right? But small companies can't afford all this stuff. They don't know how to fill out these forms, and if you get it wrong, some Frenchy bureaucrat will be saying, "Oh, it's long, send the goods back," and small companies can't afford this sort of rubbish, and they will close. Farmers will be facing tariffs, but they won't know what the deals are yet. But they have to decide whether to plant their crops in the spring, and they don't know whether there will be enough migrant workers to help them, or transient workers to help them harvest those crops. It depends on negotiations, on what people in Poland or Romania feel like. Do they feel like coming over here? Do they feel it's good or safe? Maybe those farmers will decide it's not worth the risk of spending a load of money planting crops that if you're not going to be able to harvest them, or if at the end of the year there will be some tariffs in place and they will not be able to sell them. So quite a few farmers, I think, will decide not to plant. It's cheaper. Save the money for next year, and in the meantime do some research and try and figure out what the heck can we do. So I think we will find by the autumn shortages of various goods in the supermarket that rely on homegrown produce. Because the crops won't have been harvested, they won't have been processed, they may not have been planted in the first place. The ones for export may not have been planted. They usually take the best bits and export those and leave the dregs for us. There might be none of that, or obviously some of it. Most farmers maybe will continue to plant and hope for the best, but those who are in a more marginal position will have to be pretty careful about that. They might plant less and spread the risk. They won't have instant export markets to the rest of the world. Those deals still need to be done. So we can expect prices, especially of foods and things, to go up, and some goods to disappear from the shelves. And there'll be imported alternatives, I suppose, at a price. So the British balance of payments will go negative, in other words. So the economy will be tanking for that reason, debt, in other words, and because lots of businesses will be closing. Not just farms, but regular businesses who export stuff, and small businesses who won't know how to handle any bureaucracy that turns up. They might be okay for this year, some of them, most of them, because we're abiding by the rules. But when the rules change, they have to figure out quickly how to deal with it. They might have to spend money hiring experts to assist them with how do we fill out these forms, what forms do we need, how do we get these goods through the checking successfully. It's all very well reading the regulations, but anyone who's tried to fill out a visa document or I don't know, anything like that, just to fill out the documentation for any bureaucracy will know how ambiguous the instructions always are, because they're written by people who don't fill them out themselves and think you know what they mean. So there will be lots of mistakes made, lots of money lost, businesses closing, jobs lost. There will be new businesses opening, because while exports will get more difficult for a period, they will recover. But for a time they will get more difficult. There will be opportunities within the UK, because the goods which are not being made and imported, say, from the EU will come from somewhere else, or businesses will be able to set themselves up and service needs which are not being met by the businesses which are closing, but they'll be able to do it in another way. Maybe they'll start up with enough capital to be able to do it. This is an excuse for the corporations to knock out a few of their smaller competitors. Yes, we'll see centralisation of business power as usual, monopolisation, and it's bad for the common people, economically, as usual. In the long run, the economy will reconfigure itself and things will steady up. And as a counter to these bad elements, there's one, I think, particularly good element, which is one of the reasons I voted to leave in the first place. I mean, we know the EU was never very interested in democratic poll results, and there are lots of MPs in Parliament who we have listened to over the past 3 years defying the will of the voters. And we should not forget who they are. But now, once we are no longer obeying the EU rules, we will have our trade agreement, or not, as the case may be. The ministers in government will no longer be able to hide behind the EU and say, oh, we can't change that. The French would never vote for it. The Hungarians would throw it out. We can't change these rules. Now, the minister responsible is going to be responsible and will have to take the flak for bad rules and regulations. We'll see some resignations, I expect, as they get used to the idea of having to respond to the British public instead of hiding behind the EU. There will be an increase in responsibility and accountability in the British Parliament as a result, and the British government. And we will see that. Probably it'll start to take effect most next year. But that will assist greatly with the redevelopment of the UK, the reorientation of the UK economy. The new businesses that open, the new business opportunities, the old ones closing, the stupid regulations being changed because a minister can't take the flak. That's what we want. And I think that's what we'll get. But it'll be tough in the meantime. We're probably going to face a recession and a significant drop in GDP, probably. Good for the environment, bad for the financial wealth of the people and the population of the country. But it's a short-term thing. I know when all these things start to go, all the levers will be saying, we told you so, we told you so, look how awful it is. As a group, they don't ever seem to get the idea that these things are short-term. It's like 5 years. And by then, we should be on the road to recovery. However, it could be tough in the meantime, and however, the world is still in a depression, actually, although nobody talks about it. So this is going to be a recession on top of a depression. So the recovery, it'll be a recovery to a low place. But then we've got the environmental catastrophe coming onto us at the same time. There'll be lots of business opportunities there too. We can expect chaos. We've got pandemics, environmental catastrophe, Brexit. What we don't need is the actual apocalypse, right? It could happen though. You know, there are lots of prophecies pinpointing what appears to be this time. So you might need a few extra tins of soup in, actually. Anyway, we shall see. Bye for now. Tell me what you think in the comments, okay? Bye for now.